Chapter 1. The Invisible Mask. Imagine a world where a young black woman, armed with a master's degree and a legacy of power, is forced to scrub floors just to prove her worth, while the suits above her sip lattes and sneer. That's the twisted game Maya Jackson walked into, all because her own father, the untouchable CEO of Carter Financial Group, demanded it. "You think you're ready to lead?" he'd said, his voice cold as steel, shoving her into a janitor's uniform like some sick test of humiliation. Maya stood at the edge of the gleaming glass tower in downtown New York, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. At 26, she was a woman who carried the weight of her father's legacy and her own ambitions. She'd just returned from London, her master's degree in business administration still fresh in her hands, a ticket to the corner office of Carter Financial Group, or so she'd thought. But James Carter, her father and the company's formidable CEO, had other plans. "You want to lead this company one day?" he'd asked her over dinner the night before, his voice low and steady. "Then see it for what it really is. Not from the top, not through spreadsheets or polished presentations. From the ground up, where the real work happens, where people show who they truly are." Maya had blinked, unsure at first. "You mean, work in the mailroom or something?" James had chuckled, shaking his head. "Lower. You're starting as a janitor. No one will know who you are. Not my daughter. Not a Jackson. Just Maya, the new cleaner. Watch, listen, learn." Now, here she was, standing outside the building she'd visited countless times as a child. Only this time there were no warm smiles from staff or VIP escorts to the executive floor. She adjusted the faded gray uniform they'd given her, too big in the shoulders, stiff from starch, and tucked her braids under a plain cap. In her hands, she gripped a worn janitor's badge with her name printed in small, unassuming letters. Maya, no last name, no title, just Maya. She took a deep breath and stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby buzzed with the morning rush, suits and briefcases, the clack of heels on marble, the hum of power deals being whispered over coffee. No one spared her a glance. She was invisible, a shadow in a world of light. That is, until she reached the security desk. A guard, a middle-aged man with a buzz cut and a skeptical squint, looked her up and down. "You sure you work here?" he asked, his tone sharp, his eyes lingering on her dark skin a bead too long. "Don't look like the usual type." Maya's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile, holding up her badge. "Just started today," he grunted, waving her through without another word. The sting of his words lingered, though. Usual type. She'd faced those quiet judgments before, at school, on the subway, in stores, a black woman in a space where people didn't expect her to be. But this time, she wasn't here to prove anything, not yet. She was here to watch. As she stepped into the service elevator, the doors closing behind her, Maya whispered to herself, "Let's see what you're hiding." Carter Financial. The game had just begun. Chapter 2. Life in the Shadows. The first week at Carter Financial Group taught Maya Jackson one thing. Invisibility was a double-edged sword. She rolled her cleaning cart through the pristine hallways, the wheels squeaking faintly against the marble floors. Men in tailored suits and women in sharp blazers brushed past her without a glance, their voices a blur of stock prices and client meetings. To them, she was a fixture, like the potted plants or the humming coffee machines, necessary but beneath notice. And that was exactly where she wanted to be. For now, her days started at dawn. Long before the executives trickled in, she emptied trash bins overflowing with crumpled memos, wiped down glass desks smeared with fingerprints, and swept floors littered with careless spills. She kept her head down, her cap low, her hands busy, but her eyes and ears? They were wide open. Every snide remark, every power play, she tucked them away in a small notebook she hid in her uniform pocket. Her father had told her to watch, and Maya intended to see everything. It didn't take long for the shadows to reveal their first monster, Henry Brooks. He strode into the open plan office on her third day, his polished shoes clicking with authority, his voice booming over the cubicles. A senior manager with a corner office and a reputation for getting results. Henry carried himself like he owned the place, and to him, Maya was just another piece of furniture to kick around. Oops, he said with a smirk, knocking his coffee mug off the edge of his desk. The dark liquid splashed across the carpet, pooling at her feet. Better clean that up, sweetheart. Quick, now, I've got a call in 5. Maya's fingers tightened around the handle of her mop. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, a quiet audience waiting to see if she'd snap. But she swallowed the fire in her throat, knelt down, and started scrubbing. Henry leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching her with a glint of satisfaction. "You're slow," he muttered, loud enough for the nearby desks to hear. "Guess I shouldn't expect much." Typical. The word hung in the air, typical. It wasn't just about her pace. She'd heard that tone before, seen that look. It was the same one she'd gotten from professors who assumed she'd cheated her way to good grades. From store clerks who followed her down aisles. A black woman with a mop? To Henry, she fit a stereotype he didn't bother questioning. Maya bit her lip and kept scrubbing, the damp rag cold against her skin. The harassment didn't stop there. Henry made it a routine, dropping pens after she'd swept, tossing wrappers right past the bin she'd just emptied, barking orders like she was his personal servant. "Redo that window," he'd say, pointing at a spotless pane. "I can still see smudges. Maybe if you tried harder, you'd get it right." Each jab was a test, and Maya passed it by staying silent, her notebook growing thicker with every incident. Not everyone was cruel. Talia Evans, a junior analyst with warm brown eyes and a cautious smile, slipped Maya a bottle of water one afternoon when Henry wasn't looking. "You okay?" Talia whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "He's a jerk to everyone. But you don't deserve that." Maya nodded, grateful but guarded. "Thanks. I'll manage." Talia hesitated, like she wanted to say more, but then scurried back to her desk. Maya understood. Speaking up meant risking Henry's wrath. And in a place like this, survival often trumped solidarity. Still, Talia's small act of kindness was a crack of light in the gloom. The whispers were harder to ignore. As Maya pushed her cart past a cluster of desks, she caught fragments of conversation. "She's too clean for a janitor," one woman murmured, eyeing Maya's neat uniform. "Probably thinks she's better than us." Another snorted, "Nah, they just hired her to check a diversity box. You know how it is, optics." The words stung, sharp and casual, like they didn't even realize she could hear. Or maybe they didn't care. By the end of the week, Maya's hands were raw, her back ached, and her notebook was half full. She'd documented Henry's spills, his insults, the way he'd sneered when she'd asked where the supply closet was. Figure it out. It's not rocket science. She'd noted the sideways glances from coworkers, the muttered assumptions about her place in their world. But she'd also seen flickers of unease, employees who looked away when Henry snapped at her, their silence louder than words. One evening, as she wiped down a conference table after hours, Maya paused to stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The New York skyline glittered below, a city of ambition and secrets. She thought about her father's words. See it for what it really is. This wasn't just about Henry's ego or a few petty slights. It was deeper, a culture that thrived on power, that judged worth by skin and status, that hid its ugliness behind glass and steel. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote, "Day 7. They don't know I'm watching. But they will." Then she tucked it back into her pocket, adjusted her cap, and pushed her cart toward the next room. The shadows might think they owned her, but Maya Jackson was no one's pawn. She was a storm brewing in plain sight. And soon, they'd feel the thunder. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The second week at Carter Financial Group was a crucible, and Maya Jackson felt the heat rising. Henry Brooks had turned his petty games into a full-on campaign. As if breaking her spirit was his new KPI. Every day brought a fresh humiliation, each one sharper than the last. And Maya's notebook was running out of pages. She kept her head down, her hands steady, but inside, a fire simmered, quiet, controlled, waiting for its moment. It started small, like always. On Monday, Henry dropped a stack of folders in the hallway right after she'd swept. Papers scattering like confetti. "Pick those up," he barked, not even turning around as he strutted off. Maya clenched her jaw, knelt, and gathered them, the edges cutting into her calloused fingers. A few desks over, she caught a snicker, She's good at following orders. Huh? And her cheeks burned. She wrote it down. Day 8. Henry, deliberate mess. Laughter from cubicle 12. By Wednesday, it escalated. Henry cornered her near the break room, holding a wrinkled dress shirt. Take this to the dry cleaners, he said, tossing it onto her cart. Make sure it's crisp. I've got a client dinner tomorrow. Maya froze, her hands hovering over the fabric. I'm here to clean the office, she said, her voice low but firm. Not to run your errands. Henry's smirk widened, like he'd been waiting for her to push back. You're here to do what I say, he snapped, stepping closer. Or do I need to talk to facilities about their hiring choices? Maybe they picked the wrong one for this job. His eyes flicked over her, lingering on her cap, her uniform, her skin, a silent jab at everything she was. She could almost hear the unspoken words, "You don't belong here." Before she could respond, Talia Evans appeared, clutching a stack of files like a shield. That's not right, Henry, she said, her voice trembling but clear. She's a janitor, not your maid. Henry wheeled on her, his face darkening. Mind your business, Talia. Or do you want to join her scrubbing floors? I hear they're hiring. Talia flinched, her eyes darting to the floor. And Maya saw the fear win out. Talia retreated, muttering an apology under her breath. Henry turned back to Maya. Triumphant. Shirt. Dry cleaners. Now. Maya squared her shoulders, shook her head. No. The word hung between them, sharp and final. Henry's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. What did you say? I said no, she repeated, meeting his gaze. It's not my job. For a moment, the break room was silent, every head turned, every breath held. Then Henry laughed, loud and mocking, grabbing a cup of water from the table. Fine, let's cool you off. Then, he tipped it over her head, the icy liquid soaking her cap, her uniform, her dignity. Gasps rippled through the room. Water dripped down her face, stinging her eyes. But Maya didn't flinch. She stood there, fists clenched, staring him down. Look at her, all tough now, Henry sneered, tossing the cup aside. Next time, do what you're told. You're here to clean up messes, mine included. A chair scraped behind them. Talia stepped forward again, her voice steadier this time. That's enough, Henry. You can't treat people like this. He shrugged, unfazed. Relax, Talia. She's just a janitor. It's her job to take it. He sauntered off, leaving Maya dripping and the room buzzing with whispers. She shouldn't have talked back. Someone muttered nearby. People like her always push it too far. Maya caught the words, the casual venom in them, and her stomach twisted. People like her. She knew what they meant. Black, female, lowly. The assumptions were a weight she'd carried her whole life. But here, in this gleaming tower, they cut deeper. Talia grabbed a handful of napkins and pressed them into Maya's hands. I'm sorry, she whispered, her eyes wide with guilt. I should have done more. Maya wiped her face, forcing a small smile. You tried, that's something. But inside, she was steeling herself. She shook her head at Talia's worried look. Not yet. The time wasn't right. That afternoon, alone in a supply closet, Maya pulled out her notebook. She scribbled. Day 10. Henry, water incident. Public humiliation. Talia spoke up. Others watched. Her pen hovered, then added. They think I'm nothing. They're wrong. The real breaking point came Friday. Maya was mopping the executive floor when Henry appeared, leaning against a glass wall, arms crossed. You're working hard, he said, his tone slick with something that made her skin crawl. I like that. She straightened, wary. I've got work to do. Excuse me. He blocked her path, his hand brushing her arm. Too long. Too deliberate. I could make things easier for you, he said, lowering his voice. Better hours. Better treatment. Maybe even a step up from this. He smirked. All you have to do is keep me happy. Her stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. She yanked her arm free, stepping back. What are you saying? Henry's grin faltered, then hardened. Don't play dumb. You're new. You're nobody. I've got pull here. I could protect you, or make your life hell. Think about it. Maya's pulse pounded, but her voice was ice. I don't need your protection. And you'll regret this. He scoffed, yanking the door open. Big talk for a mop pusher. No one's gonna believe you over me. He stormed out, leaving her shaking with rage and resolve. In the hallway, a few employees lingered, pretending not to see, but Talia was there, her eyes narrowed at Henry's retreating back. She met Maya's gaze, a silent question in her expression. Maya nodded once, firm. The storm was coming, and Henry Brooks had just lit the fuse. Chapter 4. The Truth Unleashed. The air in Carter Financial Group's conference room was thick with anticipation on the morning of the big meeting. It was Friday, 10 a.m., and the sleek glass walls reflected a sea of pressed suits and nervous faces. Employees murmured, speculating about James Carter's important announcement. Retirement rumors had swirled for weeks, and everyone had their bets on who'd take the throne. Henry Brooks stood near the front, his chest puffed out, his smirk as polished as his cufflinks. He was certain it was his moment. Maya Jackson, still in her damp janitor's uniform, stood quietly at the back, her notebook tucked under her arm. She'd waited for this. James Carter stepped to the podium, his presence commanding silence. At 60, he was a towering figure, gray hair, sharp eyes, a voice that could cut through steel. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his tone measured. "Today marks a turning point for this company. As you know, I'll be stepping down soon, and I've chosen my successor." Henry straightened, adjusting his tie, his confidence radiating. A few heads turned his way, nods of approval rippling through the room. But before James could continue, Henry seized his chance. "Sir," he interjected, gesturing toward Maya with a dismissive wave. "Why's she here? This is a meeting for key staff, not the cleaning crew." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd, awkward glances, stifled coughs. James turned to Henry, his expression unreadable but cold enough to freeze the room. "Henry," he said, his voice low, "I personally invited her. Do you have a problem with that?" Henry's smirk flickered. "But sir, she's just enough." James's word landed like a gavel. Henry's mouth snapped shut, his bravado wavering for the first time. Maya felt every eye shift toward her, a mix of curiosity and disdain. She stood taller, her chin lifted. "For months, I've prepared for this transition," James continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I needed to know the truth about this company, not from reports or flattery, but from the ground up. That's why I sent someone to see it all, unfiltered." He paused, then turned to Maya. "My successor is Maya Jackson." The room erupted, gasps, whispers, a chair scraping the floor. Henry's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table as the realization hit. "Wait, what?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "Her? She's not just a janitor," James said, his tone cutting through the chaos. "She's my daughter. For weeks, she's worked undercover, observing this company's true culture. And what she found," his eyes locked on Henry, "was unacceptable." Maya stepped forward, her uniform dripping faintly from Henry's earlier stunt. She pulled out her notebook and a small recorder from her pocket. "I've seen it all," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. "The power trips, the cruelty, the way people are treated when they're beneath you. And Henry Brooks," she pressed play on the recorder. His voice crackled through the speaker. "You're nobody. I could protect you, or make your life hell. All you have to do is keep me happy." The room went silent, the weight of his words sinking in. She flipped open her notebook. Day 10. Public humiliation with water. Day 12. Harassment. Every incident documented. Henry staggered back, his face ashen. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding," he sputtered. "I was joking. I didn't mean." "Joking?" James interrupted, his voice rising. "You think humiliating someone, abusing your power, threatening them is a joke? Maya has evidence, dates, times, witnesses. And this," he nodded at the recorder. "This is who you are when you think no one's watching." The room buzzed again, heads turning, eyes narrowing at Henry. Talia Evans, seated near the middle, stood up, her hands trembling but her voice firm. "I saw it too," she said. "The water, the threats. He's been like this for years." Henry whirled on her. "You stay out of this." "No," Talia shot back, emboldened. "You don't get to silence us anymore." James raised a hand, quieting the room. "This company doesn't tolerate bullies. It doesn't tolerate predators or bigots. Henry Brooks, you're fired, effective immediately." Henry's knees buckled. Sir, please, my career, my family. You should have thought of them before you chose to destroy someone else's dignity. James said, his tone final. He nodded to security. 2 guards stepped forward, cuffing Henry's wrists as he protested, his voice fading into pleas as they dragged him out. The door slammed shut, leaving a stunned silence. Maya took a deep breath. Stepping to the podium, I didn't do this for revenge, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. I did it to show what's real here. This company will change, starting with fairness, respect, and accountability. If you work hard, you'll rise. If you abuse power, you'll fall. Simple. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. James placed a hand on her shoulder, pride in his eyes. I'm stepping down, he said. Maya's your new CEO. Treat her as you would me, or better. The room dispersed slowly, whispers trailing behind. Talia approached Maya, a tentative smile on her face. You're incredible, she said. What's next? Maya looked out the window at the sprawling city below, her mind racing. She'd won this battle, exposed the rot, but the war wasn't over. There were others like Henry out there, hidden in the shadows. Waiting, she turned back to Talia, her expression fierce yet uncertain. Next, we build something better, but I can't do it alone. Will you help me? Talia nodded, and for a moment, they stood together, 2 women against a towering unknown. Outside, the New York skyline shimmered, a promise and a question mark. The truth was out, but what came next? That story was still unwritten. Chapter 5. A New Dawn. Uncharted. The air in Carter Financial Group felt different by Monday morning. The glass tower still gleamed. The hum of ambition still pulsed through its halls. But something had shifted. The weight of fear that had clung to the corners, Henry Brooks's shadow, had lifted, replaced by a cautious hope. Employees moved with lighter steps, their whispers less guarded. Maya Jackson stood at the edge of her new office, the CEO's suite, gazing out at the New York skyline. The view was hers now, earned not through birthright but through grit and truth. She'd spent the weekend replaying it all, the water dripping down her face, Henry's smug grin, the recorder's damning echo. She thought about Talia's trembling courage, the silent onlookers who'd finally seen the cost of their apathy. Most of all, she thought about the notebook, now locked in her desk drawer, a testament to the unseen battles fought in plain sight. It wasn't just about one man's cruelty. It was about a system that let him thrive, a culture that judged her worth by her skin and her mop before her mind. James Carter had hugged her after the meeting, his voice thick with pride. You've done what I couldn't, he'd said. You saw the rot and cut it out. But Maya knew it wasn't that simple. Rot didn't vanish with one swing of the axe, it lingered, deep in the roots, waiting to creep back if she let it. She turned from the window as Talia knocked on the open door. They've approved your promotion, Maya said, smiling. Head of hour. You stood up when it mattered. I need that kind of strength beside me. Talia's eyes widened, then softened. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know, Maya replied, but it's not just about us. It's about them. She nodded toward the bustling floor beyond the glass. Some laughed at Henry's games. Some stayed quiet. We've got to change that. Talia nodded, resolute. Where do we start? Maya thought about the guard's skeptical squint on her first day. The whispers of diversity hire. The way Henry's, typical, had sliced through her. She thought about every black woman who'd walked these halls, or any hall, under the same shadow of doubt. We start with respect, she said, not as a favor, but as a standard. No one's invisible here anymore. The words felt like a vow, one she'd carry into every meeting, every decision. The company was hers to reshape. But beyond its walls, the city, and the world, still churned with the same old biases. She'd exposed one truth, but how many more waited? As Talia left to prepare, Maya lingered, her gaze drifting back to the skyline. A new dawn had broken, but the horizon stretched wide and uncertain. She'd won this fight. What came next was hers to define, or to discover.